swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And before we get started, I just want you to know if you are out there struggling right now, you are not alone. Please don't suffer in silence. I'm really excited about my guest today, Brian H. He's been sober since February 24th, 1988. More than 3 decades of continuous sobriety, one day at a time. After finding a new way to live through the Big Book, Brian didn't just stay sober, he went deep, studying under and working alongside Joe from the legendary Joe and Charlie Big Book workshops. He spent decades carrying the message forward, leading seminars, sponsoring others, and helping people understand the book in a way that truly transforms lives. His journey is proof that recovery isn't just something you start, it's something you continue to grow in for a lifetime. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more of his story. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm good, Joe. I'm good. Wish I could have a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, we're going to hold off on the coffee today. Brian has a procedure tomorrow that we won't talk about, but I appreciate him being willing to come on, even with that procedure coming up. So, thank you for that, Brian. I got him laughing already, folks. It's going to be a good day. So what was it like growing up, Brian?
Oh man, what was it like growing up, Brian? Well, I guess there's a couple of little phases of that. I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia, suburbs of Philadelphia, Norristown, Pennsylvania. It's where I was born. I was raised in Hatboro, Horsham. A middle class family. My dad worked. My mother stayed home with the kids. That was pretty common back at that time. My mother later worked when we were grown. I've learned some things about my childhood. I struggled, I think, admitting that there could have been anything wrong because I really do come from a very good home. My parents were Catholic. They went to church. We were raised around family and friends. And there was not drinking, abuse, of any kind. Something that I think I did later learn, though, sometimes we grow up, we think the way that we grow up is the only way that people grow up. And I think I learned later that, my parents, again, if they knew that there was something that they could do that would have been beneficial to me and my 2 brothers, they would have done it. They absolutely would have done it. But there were some things that I guess that they probably just didn't know. And it wasn't really the kind of home where they were very involved emotionally in our lives. My brother, I feel like, I describe it this way, which is, we grew up in the playroom while our parents were downstairs watching TV, kind of a thing. And there wasn't a lot of direct involvement in our day-to-day play. But there were lots of other things we did together. We ate meals together. We had we played games together on occasion. But I feel like the everyday life was a little emotionally unavailable. And I think that played some role and I don't, I wonder how my brothers would perceive that. I doubt they would perceive that much differently. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I don't know if we're probably around maybe around the same age. I'm 56 now, but we were kind of the latchkey kids so we kind of grew up in that era of, we were left to our own devices, so to speak, to figure out a lot of things. My mom actually grew up in Ridley Park, Pennsylvania, and so I
Oh,
came from that's outside of Philly somewhere, and
okay.
I grew up in New Jersey, so we're from somewhat of the same
Sure.
area.
Yeah. We vacation at the Jersey Shore. We still vacation at the Jersey Shore. Like my uncle still has a place, or has another place now in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. Yeah, and we used to summer in Wildwood every summer for a week or two. I don't know how long. It seemed like forever to me.
We probably passed each other. I spent summers in Wildwood. My aunt and uncle had a house on Hildreth Avenue, and
Oh,
my first job was at the Crestwood Diner. Shout out to the Crestwood Diner. It's probably closed at this now.
a lot of places have since the
Yeah,
pandemic, but yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
But
and I'm only 2 years older than you, so you're right. We probably were, we were doing a lot of the same things around the same area. Yeah, yeah.
that's kind of cool. So, do you remember the first time you felt the effects of alcohol or drugs?
I thought about that. I don't know that I do. I have a couple of memories of first drinks, or of drinks early on, and I think one of them was the first drink. It was I smoked. My like the big thing that I did. It was terrible. Was smoking cigarettes, and that started into, I think, marijuana. I think I actually smoked pot before I ever had a drink. Um, but there was a gal walking distance from my house who used to have people over all the time, kids from school over all the time. And I remember one time, and this wasn't routine for this scenario, but this one time, we just all got just blitz out of our minds drinking, and I actually think that was the first drink that I actually had. Yeah, I think smoking pot was a thing that my older brother, turned me on to before that. But yeah, yeah, pot and drinking, that was my big thing in the early phases. Yeah.
That them older brothers, man, they get us in trouble sometimes.
It wasn't as much him trying to uh, get me in trouble. I think it was more me looking up to him and wanting, he was the cooler older brother, 2.5 years older. His friends were, the cooler older people. And I think it was more, that aspiration with me. I wanted to be liked and accepted by my brother and his friends. And so I had to be cool in order to do that. So I did things that made me cool, like smoke cigarettes and pot. Yeah.
No, I get it. I get it. It makes sense. I had an older brother too. He was a little. I looked up to him, but he was a little more straight laced than I was. And I was just I was a little bit reckless for most of my life. But
We moved to South Florida when I was 11 years old. So my dad worked for a savings and loan. You probably remember those. Those aren't around anymore. My dad, he got a promotion to be a vice president of a branch of a savings loan down here in South Florida. And I was 11 years old. He was taking the family from the suburbs of Philadelphia and moving to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We actually grew up in Coral Springs, and being 11 and all, I decided I probably should go with him. uh, that was, and that I got into some trouble just before. I got caught shoplifting or something like that. And I do remember there was this very distinct atmosphere surrounding my parents dealing with me, that I was, trouble. I remember them having conversations, or having, or having an atmosphere about me that was trouble. And shortly in the first years that we lived down here, I was bullied by a neighborhood kid, and he took my backpack one day, with my school books in it, and threw it in a red ant pile. Um, and this was just one day of many days of bullying. He was, for whatever reason, he was taller. He sprouted earlier than the rest of us. He was the same age, and somehow or another we started fighting and wrestling. And somehow or another, I mean, I was not like some tough kid, but somehow or another, this ended up with him going over my back and landing on his head on asphalt and him getting a concussion. And I remember that evening, his parents came to see my parents. And I remember my parents' reaction to me was, first the shoplifting and now this. And that was, I think that was formidable for me. Like I've done some work in some outside, not AA, but outside AA stuff, some personal development stuff. And it struck me that those connections, those were formidable. I think I made up that day that I was bad, and that I was going to be trouble, and I sort of like I took on the persona that was perceived of me at the time, I think.
It's well, and obviously remembering that kind of stuff, I think it's and being able to talk about it, it's amazing what we internalize as kids. I always think that I spent a lot of my adulthood trying to fix a childhood, or what I perceived as a childhood, or what I perceived as was wrong with me in childhood that really I couldn't fix, and so that's really powerful to kind of know that started to formulate kind of your attitude and outlook on life, really. So where did it go from there, Brian? Like,
well, I became the kid who hung out with the partiers. And so even that, like that first drink was obviously later than the experience I just shared. But that was the beginning of me hanging out with the kids who were drinking after school, getting high, skipping school. We used to skip school and go out to the cow pasture at the end of Broward County and pick mushrooms. I remember walking into school during lunch one day, tripping, just absolutely insane that I went to school that way. That just, and it turned into trouble. It just turned into me not doing well in school, eventually dropping out, getting into trouble at school, getting suspended all the time. I was even expelled from school. I was forced to change schools. Had a neighbor who was a guidance counselor who got me into another school within the same district, which was unusual for people who were expelled from school to just be able to go to another school, I think. But because of that connection, I was able to do that. But that was just, my partying life, my getting high and drinking was just more important than anything else. I was probably already, addicted and alcoholic. I can't know that for sure because I didn't try to stop. In order to know you're an alcoholic, you have to try to stop and be unsuccessful. And I wasn't interested in stopping in those days. How would I know? But it certainly was a habit. Certainly was out of control. I certainly was getting into a lot of trouble. These troubles were just mounting. My poor mother, I tortured her. My mother's been passed now since 2008, and she's, I literally tortured her. I mean, this is a woman who loved me to death, wanted nothing but the best for me, would have done anything to try to help. And I just made her life kind of miserable.
we tend to do that to the ones we're closest to, I think. I think that's very, very common. I for what it's worth, my mother and I were very close. I didn't think so. I thought that she was, always out to get me, and then I look back on my life and I'm like, man, that she was desperate to save me from myself, and had no idea how to do it. So did anyone back then kind of say, hey, Brian, you're getting a little out of control,
Yes, but mostly, people who wouldn't want kids drinking and using drugs, like my parents and school principals and teachers, even some teachers that were, a little friendlier and less disciplinarian would say, would have, and I developed a reputation. So I would get into trouble that I would get in trouble for things that other kids wouldn't probably get in trouble for. I remember telling a joke that wasn't even a dirty joke, but it included a dirty innuendo, and getting suspended from school for it. There was no other kid in that school would have gotten suspended for that. But looking back at it, I mean, that's how I projected myself. I was put on tight, I was put on, very thin watches. As soon as I would do anything wrong, they were right there nip in the bud, because I had already demonstrated that I was just going to keep, acting worse and worse. So they put me on a tight leash, warranted. By the time that I could drive, Joe, I was already an alcoholic, I think. The only thing that I needed to get a DWI was a driver's license. As soon as I got a driver's license, I got a DWI. I got my second one before I ever got my driver's license back from the first one. I was already a full-blown alcoholic by the time I was 16 years old, I think. So.
And that, I mean, and obviously you were having consequences, the DUIs, of course. Even before that, the stuff that you're talking about, I mean, consequences just kept going. Did you think of yourself, I mean, looking back, did you think of yourself as having any, being an alcoholic or having a problem with drinking or any of that? Or it's just like,
nope,
just unlucky?
Nope. I was having fun. I thought, I was rebellious. I did what the funny thing is that, I looked at it at the time as I was doing what I wanted to do. Of course, you inventory this stuff in AA and you realize I never made any choices. I was driven by instincts. I was driven by a need to be liked and accepted. And most of the, I just, way I think about it anyway, most of the crowds in school required you to be good at something to be liked and accepted. One of the things I wasn't good at anything. And I remember being on a baseball team, probably a t-ball team. And this is probably back in Pennsylvania. So this was pre 11 years old. I remember the coach yelling at me because I had 0 hits in like 2 seasons, or maybe the whole season or whatever. I had like a 0 batting average, I guess it couldn't have been t-ball because that can't be true in t-ball, I imagine. And I remember, like, I think thinking about that later, like a few years later, looking back on that. And I think I remember thinking at some time in my life that I lacked some desire to learn things. Like, I didn't improve in practice at baseball. I lacked the desire to get better or to improve. And I think as an adolescent, I think most of the groups that you could associate with in school and coming up in school, which most of your friends are in school, right? As you're a young person. I think most of them required you to be good at something. So I picked the thing that I only had to be bad at to get liked and accepted. I really think that's like a picture of what happened. The only thing I needed to be liked and accepted by these people that I wanted to like and accept me was to be bad and not do things I was supposed to do and not learn anything. And I think that was a lot of the motivation of that. I didn't think I had a problem. I thought I was, just doing what I wanted to do. And little did I know I was just being driven by this need to be liked and accepted.
And that, that's pretty powerfully insightful, really, to realize, I didn't have this desire, maybe to learn, but I did find this one thing that worked for me and got me accepted. And it was just being rebellious or bad or whatever. Funny you mentioned t-ball, baseball. I played baseball too as a youth, and I was so uncomfortable everywhere I was that they put me at that point. They put me out in right field, and if you know anything about baseball, they put the ones that are like the worst you are in the right field, and I would stand out there and pretend I was pitching the whole time. Like I could not just stand out there. I had to pretend I was pitching or doing something, and it's. Uh, you just brought that when you brought up the baseball. It's like it brought that memory back. I'm like,
now you're going to get a laughing fit out of me, Joe, because my favorite comedian, I don't know if I should mention his name. I don't want to get you in any trouble, but, does a whole bit about being sent to right field because he sucked. And yeah, I've listened to this, 100 times, and I just love the comedians.
now you can think of me, Brian. That was me as a kid, man. I was a sucky right fielder for real.
I'm sure I was in right field too. Yeah.
So, did there come a time when you tried to stop drinking but couldn't?
After the first, maybe not after the first DWI, but after the second DWI, there were, the trouble was mounting. Now, I never really wanted to stop, but it was necessary to, because of some of the consequences that I was facing. And I was incapable of doing it. I didn't see it that way at the time. I just, that's the funny thing about, alcoholism and addiction. It's like, I would be absolutely convinced that I couldn't drink or get high. And then I would change my mind like that. I didn't know that I didn't know that there was something wrong with me. I just thought, F it. I don't, I'm not gonna, this morning I wasn't drinking. Now I'm drinking. So what? I just, but it was necessary. Like I meant it when I said I wasn't going to. I didn't want, it's not that I didn't want to, it's that I knew that I needed not to, and was unable to follow through and actually not. I don't know that I could see it at the time as a problem. But later on, looking back, it was obvious that was the start of my understanding that it was the start of me not being able to control it. I probably couldn't have controlled it before that. But like I said before, I was never trying to stop before. Now, later on when I'm in AA, I'm looking back and I'm going, now I understand what's going on. Like I was unable to control it and I was unable to quit, and that was the problem. And those different times that I was trying, I thought I just changed my mind. Again, I think I'm the all powerful Brian. I'm doing what I wanted to. I always thought I was doing what I wanted to. Turns out I was never doing anything I wanted to do. I was driven either by instinct or I was driven by addiction. And I made very few choices about my life in hindsight, looking back on it.
So, what was the moment that you realized you needed help? Was there? Because you got sober young.
I did. My sobriety is a series of interventions. So the first and most important of those interventions, Joe, is that I had parents who I got two very clear messages from. One was that they loved me very much. They would, no matter how much trouble I got in and no matter how many times I had disappointed them before, they would always open their heart and home to me and always give me a place to go and a chance. And the second very clear message I got from them is that they would not put up with one iota of my bullshit. I was thrown out of the house the first time at 17 years old. They just weren't, like, some of my behavior they just were not having in their home, and my continual promises to do and not do certain things. I kept breaking them. And I had parents who did not bail me out of jail. They did not hire lawyers. They did not pay fines. They did not. I was made to suffer the full extent of the consequences that I was earning, and that in itself is an intervention. I don't think that I'm ready to get sober at 19 years old if I had people cushioning the blow of the consequences up until that time. I just don't. I don't know that would track. My brother, my older brother, and by the way, I have two brothers, and they both partied. Matter of fact, they both partied just like I did, and neither of them became alcoholics or addicts. My younger brother now drinks a lot, and his wife is concerned, but it's the kind of drinking where he lets loose when we're on vacation. I only ever see him when we're on vacation. And when we're on vacation, he's letting loose because he works 60 hours a week at his job. I mean, he's not, so he's not able to, he wouldn't be able to do that if he was an alcoholic like me. But my brothers partied just like I did and never got into the same trouble that I mean, they got, well, actually, that's not true. They got into the same trouble that I got into, some of them, sometimes. But because of that trouble, they straightened up. They buckled down. They went to school. They did their homework. They got good grades. They went to college. They became, they've both been working at the same companies for multiple decades. My older brother's been working for the same company for, I think, 40 years now. I mean, just crazy. My younger brother's, a professional engineer, and he's been working for a big engineering firm for several decades. I mean, they both did good. They got married, raised kids, I wasn't able to do any of that. The very first time my older brother got into serious trouble, my dad drug him back home after they were obviously fighting in the grass. My brother sat down at the table, didn't clean himself up or anything, just sat down at the kitchen table. It was probably a Sunday dinner. My mother, was the kind of person who, the only thing you had to do to ever make her happy was have the family around at a dinner table on a Sunday. That made her more happier than anything else in the world. And so this is probably such an occasion probably on a Sunday. And my brother sits down at the table, after this scuffle with my dad, and my dad apparently had bailed him out of jail earlier that morning or the night before or something. And he said, "That's it. That's your one time." And then he pointed his finger at me and he pointed his finger at my younger brother. "I'll get you each one time. And that's it. Never again." And he lived up to it. I mean, he was his word. He got each of us one time. I needed to got many more times, but neither of my brothers did. They learned their lesson one time, and that was it. That's all. I routinely got into trouble, and my dad did not bail me out. Did not hire lawyers. Did not, and that's an intervention. That in itself is like the first of the interventions. The other interventions were going to jail. Like I would get into some trouble. I was, as soon as I started smoking crack, Joe, I could not function at all. So that happened when I was 17 years old, late 17 years old. I started smoking crack and immediately started going downhill and could not function. I could not hold a job. I could not go to work. I could not pay a bill. I could not show up for court or pay a traffic ticket, or couldn't do anything. So I, kept driving on licenses that were suspended. Anytime I got pulled over, I went to jail. This became the routine of my life for the next 2 years. I would go to jail. I understood that the drinking and the drugging were the problem. So I would quit. I would get out. A few days later, a few weeks later, I'd start drinking again, and I would start partying again, and I pretty much wouldn't stop until I was back in jail. And this just rinse and repeat, a dozen times over the next couple of years. That was the recognition that I couldn't control it and I couldn't stop. I didn't understand it at the time, but I understood enough to know that this was, my life. I just accepted that this was my lot in life, that I was going to continue doing this and there was just going to be no end. Then I was arrested in DeKalb County, Georgia. I violated felony probation. This is actually an important story because this is the story I go back to for clear recognition of the obsession that I had. I was placed on felony probation for possession, and I did a 60-day sentence, I think it was. And then when you leave jail, I don't know how it is in Tennessee or New Jersey or whatever, but in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Broward County, Florida, you leave jail, you have to go right to the probation office. Like, you can't pass go, you can't collect $200. You have to leave the jail and walk right over to probation and report. And I did. And then I was given where I would be reporting in the future. And I was given a really just a heads up. At the time, I thought this was a real solid. The person let me know, because your charges are related to drug possession, you will be tested at your very first probation visit. 30 days in the future, I was going to be tested. What a heads up. I mean, I made it 28 days, Joe. I made it 28 days and couldn't hold out another couple days, and started drinking and getting high 2 days before reporting to probation, pissing dirty. The only thing I had going for me at the time was that, this is long enough that it took a couple of weeks to get the results back. These days, you test at probation and the cops just come and get you. But at the time, I was in Georgia by the time they figured out that I had tested dirty. And then I was arrested again in Georgia, and that was the last time. Again, an intervention. I never stopped drinking and using. These people that come into AA and white knuckle it, and I know that some of them, they probably bounce in and out. And, I've been around a lot of recovering people, and a lot of people, they go to detox, they don't make it, they're out for a few days and they drink again, and then they come back, and it's really, really hard. They go to meetings every day and they try to buckle down, and I just, those people are my heroes. The people who do that and get sober are, I don't know how to do that. I never did that. I don't think I ever could do that. Those people have my admiration, because that's hard. I was always stopped. I never stopped. I was always, we say, rescued. I was arrested, but it was really, I was rescued. I was rescued from myself. I weighed 125 pounds when they arrested me on February 24th, 1988. I'm 6'3", Joe. I'm 6'3". I weighed 125 pounds, and I was always a skinny kid, but skinny for me was 170, 180 pounds. 125 pounds, I'm almost dead. I weigh 270 right now. I don't look good at 270 either, but at 125 pounds, I was in terrible shape, and that was the last drink and drug. That day was the last time I ever had a drink or a drug. And again, I didn't choose to get sober. I was forced sober, just the way that it always had. And that begins a series of interventions that equals me ending up in AA and getting sober, and finding recovery. Because even getting into AA didn't equal me finding recovery. I found sobriety initially, but I didn't find recovery. I was working my way out before I found recovery. But even that, again, a series of interventions, things that I did not choose, that, the circumstances of my life just picked for me.
Well, what was it? What was it that helped you? Well, let me ask this first. What do you define, especially for maybe somebody who's listening who may not kind of understand what you're saying, the difference between finding sobriety and finding recovery? Oh,
yeah. I'm going to tell that story in a few minutes. I'm going to lead up to it, because this will fill in the crux of the story. So I was in jail in Georgia for 6 months. I was in terrible shape when I got there. I in an environment where every square on your tray at mealtime is a commodity to be traded for cigarettes or a honey bun or something at commissary. I had other inmates like sliding their trays to me. Like it, it was obvious that I was not in good shape. And all I could do was eat and sleep. I'd been on a terrible run of having access to way too much cocaine. And all I could do was eat and sleep. Eat and sleep. I would wake up when they called chow. I would return, take a shower because I was sweating, and then I would sleep until they called chow again. And that's all I could do for like 10 days. But in that time, I noticed a guy, because I've been in and out of jail enough that I knew to take stock of my surroundings. Like I knew to size people up and to know who to worry about, and all of that. But there was this peculiar person, named Melvin, and the reason Melvin was odd is because he was clearly the biggest, toughest guy in this. It's a 20-man dorm with 40 men in it. Okay. Just for starters. And he's clearly the biggest, toughest guy in this dorm. And he's exactly the opposite of what I'm used to. He's quiet. He's meek. He comes out and watches TV he used to watch back-to-back episodes of Cheers. I'm putting a date on the story now. And then he would be on his bunk reading his Bible. He would sometimes have little prayer groups around his Bible, 3 or 4 or 5 guys. Sometimes little Bible study sessions. And I was raised Catholic, but none of that ever meant anything to me. It was just some stuff my parents made me do. So I was the kind of person that avoids people like Melvin, though, because I avoided conversations about God and religion. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't pretend to know anything about it. I wasn't going to weigh in pro or con. If you wanted to talk about God, that's fine. I'll find somebody else to talk to. And so I avoid people like Melvin. But one day, Melvin cornered me, and he told me a story about what his life was like when he was on drugs and alcohol, just like me. And it tracked, obviously he grew up in a different area and used different things, et cetera. But he was in the same kind of trouble. He was continually trying to stay, promising people he would stay clean and sober, and not. He'd been in and out of jail, I don't know how many times, but enough times that it just tracked so similar to my story. And then he talked about the miracle that God did for him in his life, and then what his life was like now. And Melvin did not get sober in AA. Melvin got sober at a church. And I followed Melvin to the church on Sunday. The church group sent in a Bible, and I joined Melvin's little prayer and Bible study group. So when I went to that jail, I told myself, every other time I went to jail, I would swear I would never touch another drink, never touch another drug. And within weeks of getting out, I'd be drinking and getting high again. The day that I went to jail on February 24th, 1988, I knew I was going to drink when I got out. I knew I was going to use when I got out. And I knew that there was nothing that I could do about it. And I decided to stop trying, because trying to get clean and sober became the hard part about how to live my life. The easy part, which used to be harder, was about stealing in order to eat. Living in abandoned buildings or buildings under construction, sleeping, finding places to sleep like that. Like the things that initially were hard were all the easy part. And the hard part was trying to sell myself the BS idea that I was going to stay clean and sober and straighten out my life. So on the day that I went into jail that day, I knew I was going to get high. I wasn't going to try not to. And ironically, I haven't had a drink since. And Melvin tells me this story. So I equate that, by the way, with understanding that I was powerless. I didn't understand the language that we used, but I was admitting that I was powerless over alcohol and drugs, and that my life was unmanageable. When Melvin tells me this story, I clearly came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I was a long way from recovery yet, but this was the beginnings. Like this was the beginning of my spiritual journey. This was the beginning. This was the first time I ever decided that I didn't know about a lot. You know, in order to go from where I was to following Melvin to church and joining the little prayer and Bible study group, like that's a 180 change in because I don't talk to people like Melvin, right? That's a 180 change, and that was the beginning of my at least seeking recovery. Now I was in that jail for 5 months or 6 months, and I changed jail cells 5 times. Model inmates don't do that. I was as much trouble in jail, believing in God, clean and sober, as I was outside on drugs and alcohol. Did they finally settled some charges in Georgia. I get shackled up and brought back to Broward County. Remember when I told you I was on felony probation? Well, I had violated that probation, remember? And now they shackled me up and brought me back. And I was given a 2-year prison sentence. I did 6 months on the 2 years at a time where in Florida, I should have only done 3 months. Model inmates don't do twice as much time as they're supposed to do. You know, I was as much trouble in prison, clean and sober, believing in God, as I was on drugs and alcohol. So getting arrested in DeKalb County, Georgia was an intervention. Getting sent to prison in Broward County, Florida was an intervention. I needed that year. I needed that first year. I did not get high, did not get drunk in that year that I was in jail and prison. You might go, duh, but there were people getting high and getting drunk in jail and prison. Trust me. So I did not. Not that I didn't have the chance to. It just I'm grateful that the only time I ever had a chance to, I was solidly able to say no. In that prison, they stuck me in treatment. They plucked me out because I had drug charges were the reason I was there. They plucked me out of general population and stuck me in the treatment center. And I went to the treatment center literally screaming. I say kicking and screaming, but I was literally screaming at the girl whose job it was to do the intake paperwork for me to be there. I didn't want to be there. I was shouting things like, I already have an answer, because I felt like I had found God, and I didn't ask to be here. Call my classification officer. I'm not staying. I'm screaming these things at the top of my lungs to this poor woman who's just trying to help me fill out the paperwork. And but this is a really good window into the mind of Brian. I was in prison. I didn't have a choice in where my bunk was. This is like they say the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. This is a really good indication of some of the problem, right? That here I am screaming at this woman like I have a say in where I'm going to sleep in a prison. Like it's absurd, Joe. It's absurd. And I often tell this story, and I didn't tell it last night at a meeting, but I often tell this story. I sat on an iron bunk for an hour with my arms folded. I didn't unroll the mattress. I didn't unpack my tub of stuff. I sat there. I was going to sit there until they came and got me. And about an hour goes by, and it dawns on me that the day before I was in an evening church service, a Bible study that I loved to go to every week. And it was one of these kinds of experiences every Wednesday where, I felt like, there was a God in my life, and I felt like he was in control and that I was not. And it dawns on me after sitting there for an hour that I probably was right where God wanted me to be. And there's a version B of that story, though. And that is, if you sit on an iron bunk without its mattress rolled out, you might start to feel some pain in your ass. And pain has always been a great motivator, right? So I'm not saying that the first part of the first story A is not true. I'm just saying that there might have been a little bit else going on. But an hour later, I surrendered to being in that treatment center. And that surrender was so complete, and I participated so wholeheartedly because I believed now that that's where God wanted me to be, that when my group, again, group of inmates in a treatment center in prison, when my group graduated, I stayed on as the coordinator for the group that came in after, and I finished my sentence in treatment, right? That's what happened. I am not in a 12-step program, or at least I don't. Well, at least I don't have a clear path to how I get to one if this doesn't happen. If that treatment center, if they hadn't put me in that treatment center, I don't know that I end up in AA, because my intention was to get out, find a church, get involved in ministry, and go that route. And looking back on it, that clearly hadn't worked for me for a whole year. I was still trouble. So much trouble that I had to change jail cells and extend my sentence. And, I was still trouble under those. So I needed recovery. And that treatment center sent me to where I would find it. So that was how I came to understand that I needed to go to AA. Now, that gets me to AA. It doesn't get me recovery, though. Now, when I came to AA, though, I was gangbusters. I mean, look, they gave me $100 and put me on a bus back to Broward County, and I was as scared as I'd ever been in my entire life. When I went to jail in Georgia, I was scared as I'd ever been in my entire life. At that point, I'd been in and out of jail here in Broward County a bunch of times, but I'd always heard stories about going to jail in Georgia. I always thought of it as this backwoods kind of, I don't know, it's Atlanta, Georgia, for God's sakes. It wasn't like that, but still, I'm in the police car on my way to jail in Georgia, and that was as scared as I'd ever been in my life that I could remember up to that point. 6 months later, they sentenced me to prison. Again, scared as I'd ever been in my entire life. 6 months later, I'm getting out, and I am more scared than both those times, because that bus ride was all day long, and I had been pumping my head full of for a whole year, I'm going to stay clean and sober. I'm going to straighten out my life, and things are going to be okay. And that whole bus ride home, the thoughts that kept coming about every other time that I got out of jail, promising I was going to stay clean and sober, and it never working out. The rug, we were always being ripped out from under me within 30 days, sometimes within just a few days. I was scared to death that this was going to happen again. And that fear, I know we inventory fear in AA as a liability, but I promise you that fear at that time was an asset. It had me go to a meeting the next day. I didn't know, by the way, at the time, that waiting to go to a meeting to the next day cut my chances of staying sober by 85%. Did not know that at the time. I learned that later. I learned that a long time ago. I don't know if that's still the statistic or not, but I remember learning from people. I got involved in institutions, here, and that was something that was understood to be true at one point. I got out. I went to a meeting every day. I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I was in service. I did a lot of the things that Alcoholics Anonymous told me to do. I got sober in AA. I went to other recovery meetings, and believe me, I didn't think of myself as an alcoholic. I thought myself as a drug addict. It was clear that I was a drug addict because I, smoked crack, and it was like, if you looked at my life, it was like, clearly that's a drug addict. And I really thought I was a drug addict going to AA because the meetings were closer to my home. I didn't have a driver's license for several years. I had 2 DWIs. I had a habitual habitual driving on a suspended license. It was going to be a few years before I was ever able to get a work permit. And I went to the meetings that were closer to me. I went to the meetings I could ride a bicycle to. My parents took me in again. And, I went to the meetings I could go to, and that ended up being, mostly AA. I went to one NA meeting once a week, but I landed in AA by default just because of the convenience of how many meetings there were near me. The very first meeting on March 10th, 1989, on the outside, there were some meetings obviously brought into us in treatment, but I met a guy named Bruce. I met a few other people on my way into the meeting hall. But Bruce is the one that I remember meeting because he's the one that recognized me right away as a newcomer. He's the one that talked to me and found out that I just got out of prison the day before, and that this was my first meeting on the outside. He gave me he went into his into a box that they had and pulled a 12 and 12 that somebody had left behind weeks before or months before. Who knows how long it was there? And I still have that. It's like a pocket hardcover 12 and 12. I don't even think they make those anymore. And I noticed that the pages don't line up with today's 12 and 12s. I mean, so this is an old book, and I still have that today. It turns out Bruce was like this everywhere. Like every meeting that he told me where other meetings were in the local area. He's part of the reason why I found the ones that I could ride a bicycle to, and he told, including one that had just started near my house. Turns out Bruce was at every meeting early. He wasn't like just somebody sitting in a chair. He got there early enough to set up those chairs. He was in the kitchen cleaning out the coffee pot at the end, or wiping out the ashtrays because we smoked in the meetings at that time. I mean, Bruce was all over this thing, and obviously greeting newcomers and recognizing people who hadn't been there before. I remember I saw him at the speaker meeting the next night after I met him. He remembered my name, showed me where the coffee pot was. Like this, this is who he is. And he picked up his 1-year medallion that month. And this was just, I picked up a white chip actually at that speaker meeting, because they didn't do the chips at my first meeting for some reason. But I picked up my white chip at the next meeting. I picked up chips as though the day that I got out was my sobriety. And I did not fix that until I was 5 years sober. I did not count the year that I was in jail and prison. Now, nobody told me to do this. And I don't say this to tell other people to do it. I was so scared that I would not get what newcomers, that I would not stay sober if I didn't get what newcomers got in AA, that I didn't want to be picking up medallions. Nobody told me to do it. It was driven by my fear that this was just going to be one more time I got out of jail and promising to stay sober and not being able to do it. And I didn't want to I didn't want to cut any corners. And I felt like that would have been cutting a corner. If you knew me, you knew I was sober for a year more. You knew I was sober in jail and prison, but I picked up medallions as if so a year goes by. Bruce picks up his 2-year medallion. I pick up my 1-year medallion. And in that time, again, sponsor, home group, going to meetings every day, found a job, got a bicycle. I think I ended up selling that bicycle and buying a new bicycle. A year goes by and Bruce picks up his 2-year medallion. I pick up my 1-year medallion the same month. And a couple months later, Bruce drinks. And he's not the first person who I know in AA who drink, obviously. I mean, people, relapse all the time. But he never stopped doing any of that stuff. Like, he was all over this thing and drank anyway. And I just got to tell you, I couldn't make sense of that. It destroyed me. I just couldn't. I lost faith in AA at that time. And I started unwinding all the good that I did the first year. I started unwinding it all the second year. And I'll bet you there's a lot of people who are going to listen to this podcast who know many people who did exactly the same thing. And ordinarily people like me drink and hopefully find their way back. Not always. I didn't drink. But I spent that second year working my way out of AA. And that's what causes me to find recovery. Turns out I needed another bottom, and it wasn't going to be a drinking bottom or a drugging bottom. It was going to be an emotional bottom and a spiritual bottom. And by the end of that second year, back up just a little bit. You have to remember, I got sober at 19. I got out when I was 20. I picked up that medallion at 21 years old, probably, I'm thinking. And as a young person in AA, there was a lot wrong. I was very immature. not I was more immature than your average person that comes to AA. They say you're as old as you're as mature as you were when you started drinking is one of the things that you hear people say. So I started drinking when I was maybe on the cusp of 13 years old, sometime turning 12 to 13 years old, and uh, I been drinking ever since. So I'm very immature, and I chalk up some of what my early sobriety is like to not just being an alcoholic and an addict, but also being extremely immature. So I didn't like uh, I didn't care to listen to old timers, and I hate the way that sounds because it wasn't like I didn't respect people with sobriety. I did. I didn't relate to them. Like I didn't relate to people who had their lives all together. They had careers and houses and families and jobs, and like they had all this stuff, and then they started losing it because of their drinking. Like I never lost everything in my life because of my drinking. I never got anything in my life because of my drinking, right? And that's a very different story, right? And you know, you could say, oh, you're supposed to be identifying and not comparing. Um, Look, I'm a guy who tells people they should be identifying and not comparing. The problem is I don't know how that applies to me. I can't I can't see how, and this is what this was the struggle of that early sobriety is I was doing all of the right stuff, but I wasn't really growing. I wasn't really taking it on interpersonally. I didn't have a clue as to what was going on inside of me. So when I say that second year, I started unwinding all the good I did. That when I say that I lost faith in AA, I didn't see that. I didn't know that. I had no clue whatsoever. As far as I was concerned, I was fine. And we all know what that means. Uh, and I thought I really was fine, though. By the end of that second year, just to give you the first months of sobriety, our first year of sobriety, I was doing a lot of really good stuff. By the end of that second year, I'm dating a girl with a week of sobriety. Like, just to give you just some, like, if you're listening out there in podcast land and you don't know, or maybe AA isn't like this where you are, that's like one of the most frowned upon things that you can do in Alcoholics Anonymous is date a newcomer if you have especially if you have years of sobriety. And look, that wasn't the only sign that I was in trouble. There were people, really good people in AA who really loved me, who were trying to help me see that I was in trouble. I just couldn't see it. Everybody could see it but me. And the other thing I didn't care for in AA, by the way, was big book thumpers. I want to be careful how I say this. I want to make sure people understand that when I say open discussion meetings is all I went to, there's nothing wrong with an open discussion meeting, right? But I was seeking out the kinds of meetings where they were like the ain't it awful kind of open discussion meetings. The meetings where it's like they start off, does anybody have a topic or a problem? And you hear from somebody who, just had a fight with their spouse. And so they're like, oh yeah, relationships. And then we hear from 12 people about, their relationships, and, half of them married and divorced 6 times, like that, like that's the kind of meeting that I seek out. Like that's my paradigm for what AA recovery is. I don't know where I got it from. I don't know if I learned it in treatment or what, but and the thing is, there were people around me who knew better. There were big book people. I still remember something that I learned the first year of my sobriety. There was an old timer in our meeting. I said I didn't care for old timers and didn't respect them, but I respected sobriety, and I would listen to these. And I remember this one thing that an old timer said in my first couple of years of sobriety. He said, everything you need to know about how to live AA one day at a time is found on pages 84, 85, 86, 87, and 88 of the big book. I remember that to this day. I learned that my first year, I think, if not my first year, my second year. It's not like I didn't respect people or never listen to them. I just couldn't see how a lot of this applied to me. And I didn't care for big book thumpers because they were antithetical to what my paradigm for AA was. They just, big book, like my AA, I picture it like a Zen pond, it's like, just flat water. And, this is the open discussion, where it's group therapy, only without a qualified therapist. And this is my Zen garden. This is my Zen pond. And a big book thumper is like somebody throwing a rock into it and causing it to ripple. Like they come in, they're like, oh, you got to find God. You got to work the steps. You got to follow the directions of the big book. I just like, this was so outside of anything that I thought about AA. I just couldn't, I couldn't stand them. And there were exceptions. Like I would go to a speaker meeting sometimes and I would listen to somebody who would like really like they would understand themselves in this way, and they would communicate in some way that really got my attention. And they would talk about how the big book is where they got their information. I would be really inspired, and I would go home and I would pick up my big book and start reading it. War fever ran high in this New England town, which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. I couldn't ever see how that guy got what he got out of this book. It just seemed impossible to me. I just never could make any sense of it. It just didn't. I didn't relate to Bill Wilson. I wasn't this self-made, put myself through college, war hero, revolutionized Wall Street. That's so far from my life. It's just another old timer talking about how he was on top of the world and lost it all from drinking. I just couldn't relate to it, couldn't see it. And it would cause me to stop listening. And turns out there's a lot of things that caused me to stop listening. If people talked about God in a way that I didn't agree with, I stopped listening. I mean, there was a lot going on that it just was uninvestigated at the time and unknown to me at the time. And there was so much in the way. The main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind, and that it's just so true. And so what happens is some jerk in the program talked this newcomer girl that I'm dating into going to a Joe and Charlie big book study. I couldn't think of anything I would want to do less than listen to two old timers talk about the big book for 4 freaking days. Like, this is nowhere near anything that I'm interested in doing. But she's cute, so I'm there. I just, I cringe when I hear myself say that. Like, I wish it was a better story, but honest to goodness, that's how I find recovery. I'm sitting in a Joe and Charlie Big Book seminar. They called them seminars here because they did the Big Book, the 12 and 12 and AA history on Saturday nights, and they were a 4-day event similar to a convention. A lot of the Big Book studies that Joe and Charlie did were just Friday night, Saturday and Sunday events, or just Saturday and Sunday events. But this one, my grand sponsor, well, he's not my grand sponsor at the time because I got sober, Joe, in the area of Wesley Parish. I don't know if you know who that is. Old timer responsible for the fact that we have Dr. Bob's home. And my sponsor was a guy named John Williams. Not at this time, though. Not at this time. This is what happens after the seminar. So obviously the seminar makes this dramatic impact on my sobriety, my recovery. I'm sitting in a big book study, listening to Joe and Charlie break down the doctor's opinion. Allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. Alcoholism is a twofold illness. The alcoholic, once they take a drink, that aggravates a craving and causes them to physically crave alcohol, and they can't control how much they drink just because once they start to drink. I'm sitting there listening to these guys read this out of the doctor's opinion and explain it in a way that just makes perfect sense. Like, alcoholics, we're not like other drinkers. Something happens in our bodies physically that causes us to be allergic to alcohol, to have this abnormal reaction. And I'm sitting there listening to them, and I'm going, oh my God, man, that's exactly what happens to me when I drink. Remember, Joe, I don't know I'm an alcoholic. I'm a crackhead going to AA because the meetings are closer to my home. I'm listening to them describe alcoholism and I'm going, that tracks. That's exactly what happens to me. And they go on to explain the obsession. An obsession is an idea that overcomes all ideas to the contrary. No matter how bad the alcoholic wants to stay sober, or even needs to stay sober, their minds believe a lie that tells them it's okay to drink. It's just going to be tonight. Nobody's even going to know. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them. I'm going, and how, they're just trapped in this vicious cycle. The mind is killing the body and the body is killing the mind. And I'm listening to this and I'm just, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. I had no idea. And it wasn't just like, so I thought I was a crackhead going to AA because the meetings were closer to my home. And now I understand I've been in the right fellowship all along. But it's not just that. It wasn't just identifying with alcoholism. It was the first time I ever understood what powerless meant. I really didn't know. You could ask me and I would say, yeah, I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs. My life is unmanageable. Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I'm an alcoholic. Yeah. But I had no idea what any of that meant. And no amount of going to meetings and listening to people ever taught me that. And again, look, I want to be honest with you. I ran around AA for a long time saying that people in AA were lying to me. They never told me the truth about what my disease was. Is that likely the case? Is it likely the case that I went 2 or 3 years in AA without anybody ever breaking down the doctor's opinion or never ever describing alcoholism like that? It's not very likely that is the case. Like, I didn't hear things. Like, it was probably said multiple times. It just didn't fit in my ear. I just couldn't hear it. But here's what's different though. What's different is at this particular time, I'm at a bottom. I've lost faith in AA. I've unwound all the good that I was doing. I was really close to drinking. Now, I didn't know that at the time. You couldn't have told me that. But other people knew it. People around me understood that I was in trouble. I was at a low point emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was bankrupt and couldn't see it, didn't know it. And these old timers described alcoholism. And for whatever reason, I can hear it. Now, the message of AA is like famous for the message, the recovery story being shared when the person is at this low spot. That's what happens to me. I just happened to be sober for several years when it happened, right? But that's exactly what happens. I'm at a low spot and I'm hearing Joe and Charlie, and it's just turning my lights on. And they went through the whole big book that weekend explaining that, alcoholism is this twofold illness: allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. The solution is a spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of our lives. Of these people were cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives began to dominate them. And how the rest of the 12 steps were the methodology that we use in AA to get from the problem to the solution, to have that spiritual experience and overcome alcoholism. And I left there on fire. Like, every meeting that I went to changed. Every person that I talked to in AA changed. I still hold on to some of the people, but like, I went through, like, we used to, this is before cell phones and beepers, by the way. So like, we used to record numbers. We had these little AA magnets. They were like 2 flat business card size magnets with accordion paper in between that we used to store people's names and numbers on. And I went through like 2 of those over the next couple of years because the people in my life just changed that rapidly. All those old numbers needed to come out in order to make room for the new ones. And I found a new sponsor and a new home group. And like, that was what directed me into recovery. The way that I was in AA up until that Joe and Charlie Big Book study, it was impossible for me to recover. It couldn't have happened in those conditions. I knew too much. I didn't hear things. I couldn't see how things that even I could regurgitate even applied to me. I just, I had all of the hallmarks of the person who comes in, stays sober for a year or two, and then relapses. And instead, I had an intervention. Again, another intervention. I didn't choose to recover, right? I was drugged to a Joe and Charlie Big Book study, practically kicking and screaming against my will. Only reason I'm there is because, she's cute and I want to be around her and this is where she wants to be. Like, that's the only reason. I'm not there for any other reason. There's no way you could drag me to such a thing. That's the only way you could have gotten me there. And here I am sitting there listening to this and having my entire sobriety turned upside down, having everything I think I know about AA and recovery just absolutely turned on its ear. And it was the beginning. It was the beginning of recovery. I had no idea what recovery was until that weekend.
Well, that's a hell of a story between sobriety and recovery, and powerful, man. Like that, it just reminded me of the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yep.
Thank goodness she was cute, because if she would have been ugly, you never would have made it to that meeting. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. That's terrible. I'm joking.
Trust me, my self-esteem was so low at the time, it wouldn't have mattered. If she expressed interest in me, she had me. That was it. Like, that's...
Oh, I hear you. Well, and now you actually teach Joe and Charlie, or you hold seminars. Am I right about that?
Yes and no. I did it until a few years ago.
Okay.
I used to do so. Just so I went around. My home group in Pompano Beach was the Wednesday night study group for a decade or more. My sponsor was the guy John Williams, who used to speak at the seminar. He used to do part of the 12 and 12, and sometimes the history. And he was the guy. He was Wesley Parrish's sponsee, who this all got entrusted to when Wesley passed away. I never met Wesley. Wesley died a few years before I got sober. He died just a couple of years after, or just a few years, maybe 4 years after really putting Joe and Charlie on the map. I mean, Joe and Charlie were going to get on the map anyway. But Charlie's the guy, or Wesley's the guy that Charlie talks about, who showed up at a convention somewhere where they were doing a big book talk, and Wesley was this great student of the big book. If we don't have time for this. It's just like Wesley had study guides for the big book, the 12 and 12, like written study guides that he put together, like it printed out and put together in IPECO binding machines in his home. Like, he devoted a lot of time and money and resources to what we call study groups, which are question and answers. It's basically the one for the big book is the easiest to explain because it's the one I use every week. But it's basically questions or statements in the book turned into questions used as a guide to focus the meeting on the book, so it's always easy to get the meeting back on track. If it goes off track, you can just take the next question and bam, you're right back in the book. Wesley, had these study guides for this, and he was this great student of the book. And one day he shows up at a convention somewhere, and Joe and Charlie had just done a big book talk. And, this was just like a 1 hour meeting or something like this, or maybe a, what do they call them? Workshops, like a little workshop at a convention. And he says, who the hell are you? And where did you come from? Is the way he addressed Joe and Charlie. And he found out, and because Wesley, even as big of a student of the big book as he was, he never unlocked it the way that Joe and Charlie did. And that's actually Joe McQuaney's way of saying it. He couldn't unlock it, the way that Charlie and I did together. One mind couldn't do what two minds needed to come together to do, is the way that Joe used to say it. My Joe was Joe McQuaney. I did my very first big book seminar with Joe McCoy, the late Joe McCoy. They're all passed away now, even my sponsor, John. But Joe McQuaney and Charlie were the ones that came every year to Pompano Beach and then Fort Lauderdale and Boca Raton. Every year we had this seminar in this local area. And I went every year. My first one was in 1991. That was the one that my friend Sherry drugged me into, and then I went every single year. I did not stop going until a few years ago when I stopped doing them. In 2005, Joe and Charlie were down here, and this was Joe McCoy by this time. Joe McQuaney had developed Parkinson's and had to stop doing them. But Joe McQuaney, some people, even in the early days, never knew Joe McHugh because Joe McHugh never took on the schedule that Charlie was willing to take on. Joe McHugh worked. He had a treatment center in Little Rock. And so once they got to like 15, 16 a year, Joe McQuaney started saying no. And so Joe McCoy started doing them. And so in some places around the world, Joe McCoy is the only Joe they know. But I knew both. And in 2006, Joe McSee and I did the Big Book Seminar here, and then Joe McSee took ill and couldn't make it the following year. And believe it or not, this is a story I think you'll like and appreciate. So after my very first Big Book Seminar in 1991, I sponsored a guy named Pat R. And I used to listen to Joe and Charlie on a Monday night, marking up my big book one chapter at a time, and go over to Pat's house and run it all down to him the next night. That's literally how I sponsored him. Well, in 2006 or 2007, when Joe wasn't able to make it, Pat is still sober. And he and I actually hadn't talked for a while. We ran into different circles and stuff like that, but we had only got reacquainted just like that a year before this. And Pat, the very first person I sponsored after my very first Big Book study, did the Big Book Seminar with me from that point forward. We did it together for 17 years. We've done it in different places. We've been to Rochester, New York, and Boise, Idaho, and Houston, Tampa, Daytona, a number of places. And when we did it every year, we continued the Big Book Seminar that happened every year here in the local area. I only stopped doing it a few years ago. My spiritual growth was just needed something else a few years ago, but it's coming up this weekend. Like Pat will be there doing it with Bob and some others this weekend, which is just thrilling to me. And that it kept on going. But yeah, I did the Big Book study for a number of years. And the Big Book Seminar taught me how to sponsor people, if nothing else. Like it taught me recovery, and it taught me the tools. It taught me how to take inventory. It taught me how to be honest, what was important to be honest about. It wasn't just what I did, but the motives and the instincts and the petty reasons why I did them. That was the important part of the fifth step I was to learn, and how to turn my will towards God's and seek His will for my life, and how to make amends. I mean, making amends isn't something that came easy to me. I learned that I was terrible at making amends, even after the Big Book Seminar. If you're lucky enough to stay in AA for any length of time, you get better at these things. You learn more. You listen to others' stories, and you go, oh wow, I wish I'd have done that. And all of a sudden, you're starting to incorporate things that other people look. That couldn't have happened in the open discussion meetings in my early sobriety because they weren't talking about anything of substance. But now all of the meetings that I go to and all the people in my life in recovery are people who are actually deeply committed to applying this to their life and sharing stories about what it's like to live this way. And from those people, I learned how to grow up. I learned how to live my life. I learned how to actually apply recovery. Even though I still think it took a long time. Like you would think, I went to a Big Book Seminar, taught me what recovery is. And from that point forward, it was just all peaches and cream. But no, hell no. I'm thick, man. I had a strategy for surviving without learning anything, with being closed-minded and thinking I knew a bunch, even though I didn't think of myself as somebody who knew it all. I acted like somebody who couldn't hear you, and couldn't learn from people, and that did not go away just because I went to a big book study. I still kicked and screamed for a long time learning how to apply principles. And I, the one thing I can say that is so important about the people in AA is that they love people no matter what. Like there's just so, like even when I showed my ass, people in AA loved me. If it was not for that, I don't know that I had a shot at, even after Big Book Seminar, of learning and growing the way that I ended up doing. So, it was important. It's important for me to be wrong. It's important for me to not know. And I've turned my entire belief system upside down because I'm willing to not know things. And that's been an important part of my recovery journey. So.
We're gonna have to have a part 2, Brian. That's what I've really enjoyed talking to you. Listening, because you have so much. I never knew that there were 2 different Joes. I'll tell you that. I had no idea, and because I had a friend who actually got sober in Arkansas at the rehab center that Joe McQueenie. He knew Joe McQueenie, and that was the only Joe I knew of. So I learned something. That's cool. I love that.
They were both great. I always thought of Charlie as being like the brains behind the Big Book Seminar, but Joe McQueenie being the soul of the Big Book Seminar. Joe McCoy was more like reading for Charlie and telling funny stories. I mean, everybody loved Joe because he just had these funny ways of saying things. Joe McCoy. So, but Joe McQueenie was, Joe McQueenie, it's Joe McHugh and Charlie P. who really they traveled to meet each other to study the book. They both had, before they met each other, they knew they had this instinct to study the big book and didn't find it popular amongst anybody in their AA areas. And so when they found each other at a convention, I don't know if you know the story, Charlie is about to be introduced as a AA speaker at an Al-Anon convention, and Joe is looking forward to it because Charlie P is gonna speak, and he thinks it's Charlie Pride, and Charlie gets up there and he's not even the right color, Joe says. but he learned from Charlie that he also had this interest in the big book, and that caused them to form this incredible friendship and this desire to study. And they traveled back and forth and met each other in between in order to study the big book. And eventually, like, other people started like coming along, and that's how it like turned. They just wanted to study. They wanted to learn about the big book, and they found that nobody in their area was interested. And so when they found each other, they just were incredibly drawn to each other and sharing what they'd learned since the last time in their study. And that's what turned into the Big Book Seminar. It's just this incredible thing that the love for the big book, and I remember, like, when I got sober, Joe, the big book was not a popular book. I mean, you had to, if you were a member of AA, you had to have one, and you would win one at a raffle. Every newcomer won a big book at a raffle. I remember that second meeting where I picked up my white chip, I won a big book at that raffle. I'm sure I didn't win the raffle. I'm sure somebody who won the raffle asked something like, does anybody need a big book? And I probably raised my hand and got the book. That's how it really happens. But but everybody who talked about the steps talked about the 12 and 12. And I love the 12 and 12 too. Don't get me wrong. I just, Joe and Charlie helped me understand that 12 and 12 doesn't have directions for recovery in it. It's great, stories about what it's like to live the steps one day at a time, what it's actually, the impact that the steps have on our lives. There's information in the 12 and 12 that actually helps the big book make more sense, especially with respect to the instinctual drives and that. But the big book was the book that had the directions, and the 12 and 12 was just anecdotal information adding to that. And the big book was not like ever talked about, or even people who did big book studies prior to Joe and Charlie. Those studies looked like just people reading the book and just taking a sentence and going off on a tangent about how they relate to it. It wasn't really like a study. It was just, a reading of the big book with like these, tangent points that would go off on it. And, and Joe and Charlie really nailed it. I mean, I've listened to a lot of people talk about the big book since my first big book study with Joe and Charlie. And I haven't met, and I've listened to a lot. I mean, Mark Houston's really wonderful, but I've never met anybody who's like really unlocked it the way Joe and Charlie did. They did an incredible service to our fellowship by 28 weeks a year was on their schedule. I have a copy of that schedule. I mean, that's every other weekend. Charlie and one of the Joes went somewhere and talked and did a big book study. That's an incredible commitment. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people got to hear them and see them do a big book study. So, yeah.
Incredible. I know, and I'll say this: until I listened to Joe and Charlie and with the big book, and I was introduced to it by a sponsor, I could not relate. You said it. I couldn't relate to the big book. I couldn't understand. I couldn't grasp it. And they really opened up a new world to me. And I'm grateful for that. And good for you for continuing that for as long as you did, and knowing when it was time for you to seek something different. Because I think that's just as important. Over the last year, I'm telling you, Brian, that my word of the year is seek. Do not stop seeking, because I feel like a year ago or so, I felt like I stopped seeking, and my life quickly started going downhill. And so yeah, seek.
The last sentence of either How It Works or Into Action, but I think it's How It Works, is as we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. I love that sentence in the present tense. As I draw near to him, he discloses himself to me. That's the yeah. Or the way my friend Jimmy used to say it, I'm recovering when I'm practicing it, and I'm not when I'm not. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. You could be doing it for 30 days, 30 months, or 30 years. It doesn't matter. I'm recovering when I'm practicing it, and I'm not when I'm not. There's plenty of days where a newcomer at our group has more on the ball spiritually than I do, just because they were following the directions that day. Yeah.
Well, man, thank you so much for sharing your story and the history. But I can't let you go without doing our rapid fire questions, Brian.
I'm gonna hate these, but I've listened to the show, so I'm anticipating them.
You're okay. You've got it. Thank you for listening. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
So I don't like any of the typical slogans. So I will say that I'm recovering when I just said it. When I'm recovering when I'm practicing this, and I'm not when I'm not. That's my favorite recovery slogan.
It's a good one. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
I hate that they turn think upside down. Nothing is more important than thinking. Recovery requires us to think. I mean, I get it. We're not to trust our thinking. We're supposed to be turning our thinking over to a power greater than ourselves, but that requires thinking. So, yeah.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Sponsorship. And I'm not like the best sponsor for people long term or people with lots of sobriety. Not necessarily. Not that I'm a terrible sponsor for that, but I'm really good at getting people through the steps. Recovery is an invitation, and I'm really good at extending that invitation. I don't take responsibility for other people's recovery. I think I think Al-Anons that would look at me in my life, they probably would think that I was also an Al-Anon, but I've never really been an Al-Anon. I learned the hard way. I learned through getting too emotionally attached to sponsees, how to detach and treat recovery as an invitation. The guys that I sponsor, a lot of guys, and the ones that call me, the ones that are committed to recovering, they're the ones that contact me. They're the ones that, and I'm really good at like matching their commitment and getting them through recovery and doing it in weeks instead of months. So sponsorship.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Man, I don't know if there's anything I could say to my former self that would make a difference. Lots of people said great things to me. Get out of your own way. Get out of your head.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Oh, no, this is the one I wanted to be prepared for. I don't know that I have one song that would lift my spirits. There's lots of music that I like. I'm going to try to think of one. Collective Soul has a song. It's the world I know. I forget what its name is, but that one inspires me. But like Jewel, Life Uncommon. That would be the best answer. Jewel, Life Uncommon. Yeah.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Oh, wow. One wish to help with my recovery. I had a sponsee brother who was the kind of person that could, within a couple of minutes of conversation with somebody, be able to very clearly see into them and how to help them. Not that I don't know how to help people. I know how the big book, and I know how to take people through the steps. But he had this gift that gave him insight. He could just listen to somebody for a minute or two, and he just knew so much about them and how to be there for them and what direction they needed. That gift would help me in my sobriety.
What step do you love the most?
Step 12.
What step do you love the least?
This is not a step that I like doing the least, but it's the one I like listening to people talk about in AA the least. And that would be step 2. Only because people make step 2, discussions around step 2 end up people sharing their belief in God. And I get it. That's a lot of what the step is about. But the step is so much more about giving up how I currently have it than it is about believing anything else specifically. Like, everybody believes in God very differently in AA. And so any one person's belief in God is actually meaningless to most of the people that are listening. And so I like to focus more on, and I get more out of, what people have to give up about what they think and believe. That to me is the more important part of step 2. It's the giving up.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Oh, wow. I want to lie. Because the first one that comes to mind is The Devil Wears Prada. Believe it or not, I watched that movie a couple of dozen times. But probably a close second is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I love Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And it's funny because that's a movie that my parents walked out of in the theater. And I've watched that movie, at least a couple dozen times.
They thought it was "Oh Son, Where Art Thou?" Maybe that was it. Sorry, bad joke. Bad joke. Sorry.
I like it.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh God. It's a good thing you qualified that one, if heaven exists, because I don't believe that it does. But well done.
Well, man, thank you so much for taking the time today, Brian. It's
You got
really
it.
it's been an honor having you on the show. And for the rest of you folks out there, if this episode meant something to you, please share it with one person who needs some hope today. A new episode of the Cup of Joe Show drops every Thursday at noon. You can listen anytime at thecupofjoeshow.net or on any of your favorite podcast apps: Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." And if you're looking for some daily encouragement in your recovery journey, subscribe to dailyponderables.com, delivering inspiration to your mailbox or your inbox every morning. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a good day, everybody.
It's just a laid back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.